As a kid, I spent my summers in a place most children would dream about. A cabin in the woods near Coudersport, Pennsylvania, tucked away in the dense woodlands of Potter County. It was an idyllic retreat, nestled between the whispering pines and the serene lake, far enough from civilization to be an adventure, yet close enough to not feel isolated. That summer I was 10, and the world was a tapestry of endless possibilities, woven with the threads of summer days and starry nights. My uncle owned the cabin, a robust man with a hearty laugh and a penchant for tall tales. My cousins, Jake and Emily, and I were his eager audience, absorbing his stories of the woods like sponges. We roamed the forest, embracing the freedom that only comes with being miles away from the nearest neighbor. Everything was perfect, or so it seemed. One night, or rather, in the darkest hour before dawn, our adventure took a turn I would never forget. My uncle shook me awake, his usually warm eyes clouded with urgency. "Time to go fishing," he whispered, his voice taut like a bowstring. I was disoriented, still tangled in the threads of a fading dream. Fishing? At this ungodly hour? We stumbled out of our beds, groggy and shivering in the cold air. The darkness was a thick cloak around us, the kind of dark you only find miles away from the nearest streetlight. My uncle was silent, a storm brewing in his furrowed brow as he herded us down to the dock. The boat ride was a blur of hushed whispers and shivers. My uncle's eyes darted along the shoreline, a flashlight his only weapon against the pressing darkness. The beam of light danced over the water, casting eerie shadows that seemed to leap and twist with a life of their own. We arrived at his friend's cabin across the lake. The place was shrouded in darkness, save for a faint glow from a window. My uncle's friend, a grizzled man with eyes that had seen too much, welcomed us with a nod and a whispered greeting. They exchanged looks that spoke volumes, the kind of silent communication that comes from shared secrets. "Kids, head up to the loft and stay there. Don't come down until I tell you," my uncle commanded, his voice low and urgent. "But uncle, what's going on? Why can't we stay here with you?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "It's not safe right now, just do as I say, quickly," he replied, his tone not allowing any argument. "We didn't even do anything wrong," Emily protested, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. "This isn't about punishment. It's about safety. Now go. All of you," he insisted, pointing sternly towards the loft. We exchanged worried glances, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. With heavy hearts and lingering confusion, we trudged up the creaking stairs to the loft. From our perch, we watched as our uncle and his friend exchanged a few hushed, intense words before grabbing a couple of items and heading out the door, leaving us alone in the dimly lit cabin, surrounded by the unknown dangers of the night. Up in the loft, my cousins and I huddled together, the thrill of adventure slowly giving way to a creeping dread. We whispered theories and stories, each more outlandish than the last. Had we done something wrong? Was this some strange punishment? The cabin's walls seemed to press in on us, the wind outside singing a haunting melody. Dawn broke, its light a feeble attempt to dispel the shadows of the night. My uncle and his friend returned, their faces drawn and tired. Words were unnecessary. We packed in silence, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken fears. The drive back to civilization was a quiet one. My uncle's eyes were fixed on the road ahead, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. We left the cabin and its mysteries behind, the trees standing sentinel, their secrets whispered only to the wind. Years passed, and the memories of that night faded into the corners of my mind, covered in the dust of new experiences and the passage of time. It wasn't until a family gathering, many years later, that the veil was lifted. I casually mentioned that night, not expecting to hear any answers in return. But my uncle, older now, his face lined with the roadmap of life, finally broke the silence. He recounted that night with a clarity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was around 3 a.m., he began, his eyes distant, as if peering back through the years. I was jerked awake by this persistent thok, thok, thok sound. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before, not an animal or a tree branch tapping. It was deliberate, menacing almost. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The moon was just a sliver, barely lighting up the path. That's when I saw it. A massive jack pine lying across the driveway. It hadn't been there when we went to bed. I knew these woods like the back of my hand, and trees like that don't just fall without a storm. His hands clenched tightly around his mug, knuckles whitening. I shone my light along the tree, and that's when I saw the cuts. It wasn't nature that brought that tree down. It was cut, a deliberate act to block us in. My heart was pounding, every sense on alert. I swept the flashlight around, trying to pierce the darkness that had suddenly become threatening. We were all listening intently, the room hanging on his every word. Then, I caught a glimpse of something, a reflection. It was an axe, the blade catching the moonlight, and holding it, there was this figure just at the edge of the trees. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of a tall man, standing there watching me. As soon as the light hit him, he slinked back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. His voice trembled slightly. That's when the real panic set in. We were trapped, with someone out there who wanted us that way. After rushing you kids to safety at my friend's place, we both got to work. We had to get that tree out of the way, but with every sound, every rustle of the leaves, I felt eyes on us, watching and waiting. We took turns, one chainsawing the tree, the other keeping watch with the rifle. It was the longest night of my life, every minute stretched out like hours, every sound a potential threat. We worked in near silence, the only sounds the roar of the chainsaw and our own labored breathing. The fear was tangible, a thick fog around us, as if the darkness itself was closing in. The rifle was a silent guardian, a promise of protection against the unseen dangers of the night. We didn't speak much, just exchanged nods and glances, each understanding the gravity of our situation. We were fighting more than just the physical barrier in front of us. We were fighting the fear, the unknown assailant who had marked us. He sighed, a long, weary sound. By the time the path was clear enough to drive through, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. We didn't wait around. We packed up and got out of there as fast as we could. We picked you kids up and then drove back to the village. The whole drive back, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. Finishing his story, my uncle looked around at our stunned faces. I never found out who it was or why they did it, but I knew one thing for certain. We couldn't stay there, not with the threat of an unseen watcher in the woods. That's why we left so abruptly, why I couldn't tell you kids the truth until now. As he fell silent, the room felt colder, the shadows deeper. The pieces had fallen into place, each one a fragment of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. The early fishing trip, the urgency in my uncle's eyes, the hushed conversations, they were all part of this terrifying tapestry woven that night. We had been on the edge of something dark and dangerous, and I was left with a chilling thought. How often do we brush against the unseen perils of the world, blissfully unaware of how close we come to danger?